Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, both our returning members, and I know we have some new members with us today, so welcome. Um, and I think you picked a wonderful day to begin with us because we have a great program this morning. Um, I'll start by just reminding people because as much fun as June always is with proms and graduations and the start of the summer, we are already coming up next Wednesday to Juneteenth, which is shocking to me that the month is going by so fast. And we'll post in the chat celebrations that we know of that are happening in the area. I've already had an opportunity to be out to a few communities. And if you have something going on in your community that you want to share, please feel free as we go through the meeting to add that. And, one thing that I just find very gratifying is how much those celebrations have grown. And really thinking about the three purposes they serve. Number one, a reminder of the history of slavery and the devastating impact that it had on the Black community, but as well, the remarkable progress that we have made in recognizing the influence of Black history and Black culture. And of course, we hope our thoughts about that are not just confined to one day, but really interact and are in our mind every day. And we try to really, in this task force, keep the stories of the achievements and the struggles of all racial groups in our conversations and in our thoughts as we move forward. Today, we are going to follow up on a discussion that we had here a couple of months ago about racial covenants, which were legal agreements that once prevented Black people from owning homes in many neighborhoods across the country and here in Massachusetts. And we don't like to think about that. And those covenants weren't just words on paper, they were tools of systemic racism. And they really have denied generations of Black families the opportunity to build wealth and stability. And if you saw just, I think it was yesterday in the Globe, there was an article that indicated that for many Black families, their wealth is still 15 cents on a dollar when compared to other groups. So I think it's easy to think this is something that happened, they're illegal now, we don't have to worry about it, but that really the impact has rippled forward a number of generations. And we will, as we think about that, not just the long-standing impact, but I think we also have to think about what steps can we be taking now to address those historic wrongs. We'll also hear about the tragic journey of two Indian men who were killed because of their identity. And this story, really heartbreaking story, reminds us that the hate and violence that are rooted in racial and ethnic feelings are still very present today. The lives of these two men were taken so unjustly, and their story calls us to action, to support the affected communities, to speak out against hate, and to do what we try so hard in this task force, to foster communities where everybody feels safe and valued. I say often part of my job as the district attorney is across our 1.8 million people in this county to reduce the number of people who ever wonder if they belong. That is really one of our guiding principles. And we're also going to reflect a little bit on the racial and social journey here in Massachusetts through the dark days of school busing. This era marked by attempts to desegregate the schools and the really awful resistance that it encountered offers valuable lessons. And I will just say it is so striking to me. I grew up here. I remember well when that happened. And we've done a lot of work in our office around these issues. And obviously, most of our office is made up of young lawyers and young professionals. And for them, I honestly think they think about this as having happened around the time that the dinosaurs were roaming the earth. And it was not very long ago. But people forget that. And people in our office were just shocked that that happened here in Boston and not so long ago. And it reminds us about the importance of equity in education. And again, if you haven't read it, I commend to you the article yesterday about the enormous percentage of children in Massachusetts who are still going to segregated schools. and the need that we really have to confront that systemic racism in our institution. And I think when we understand the complexities and the challenges of the past, we can do better going forward. I mean, again, one of the things that was very striking for folks in our office when we really looked at busing in Boston was they could not believe that so many of those people, the old people as they thought, are now just really in their 60s and are certainly alive and well and doing lots of policy things informed by their own experience of living through that. And that was completely surprising for people. I also, of course, want to point out that June is Pride Month, dedicated to celebrating our LGBTQ plus communities. And again, that's also a time to raise awareness about issues faced by that community and promoting a culture where everybody feels proud and empowered to be who they truly are. And like Juneteenth, it gives us an opportunity to reflect back on a time not so long ago when there wasn't that acceptance, and where in some parts of our country now there is not that acceptance, and a reminder of how lonely and unsupported people can feel in that community. And again, you know, the raid on the Stonewall Inn, the gay bar in New York City in 1969 was certainly a turning point. And the first Pride parades in New York City, Los Angeles, and Chicago were held in 1970, celebrating the 1-year anniversary of that raid. And of course, they become annual events. Boston's was last weekend. And many communities in our county have been holding events. We've got more events this weekend. So I think it's important to remember that so many of these things really happened right here, and they didn't happen so very long ago. All right, turning to today's program, we're going to begin with Kenneth Willis, who from the Federal Home Loan Bank of Boston. He's a senior vice president there, as well as the director of housing and community investment. And Ken's a member of the bank's management committee. He oversees a team of 10 professionals who administer all of their housing and community investment programs, developing and maintaining those programs, as well as doing the compliance and reporting. He is the key liaison to the advisory council of the bank, as well as the regulatory agency, community partners, and organizations focused on affordable housing. He has almost 30 years of experience. He's a well-respected leader in New England's affordable housing and community development industry. And we're lucky to have him. He's a really sought after speaker at events and forums that focus on everything from community reinvestment to small business lending. Ken has been at Bank Boston since 1998, and he began as a housing and community investment representative after having served as a loan officer at the bank. And he really, based on his own skills and his desire to shape that program, pushed forward and rose both in terms of his positions in the bank and responsibility for these programs. And he's been, as I said, a senior vice president since 2020. He's been recognized repeatedly for his work. In 2019, he received the Olivia Chase Bello Award, which is an honor presented by the Affordable Housing Education and Development program to an individual who has had a significant impact on affordable housing in New Hampshire. And he's really served as well for a role model for folks wanting to get into this work. And you literally cannot read a newspaper or watch a news program without seeing what our need is for housing, for affordable housing, and how we shape our communities of that. Ken also volunteered to serve as the first co-chair of the Inclusion Council in the bank and has really been working to educate and engage bank employees around this diversity, inclusion, the need for housing, all of those pieces. So Ken, we're really happy to have you with us this morning. Thank you.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you, Madam District Attorney. And it's a pleasure to be here today. And I really appreciate what you just said. You were talking about the busing, and I was actually bused as a kid. And you're right, those experiences do inform you as an adult. And I can honestly say that those experiences have driven me to actually create some of these programs to combat some of the social inequities that you just brought up. So I really appreciate you setting the context and the stage for that. Just again, Ken Willis Senior Vice President, Director of Housing Community Investment. Happy to be here today. I'm going to try to share my screen. This is a presentation that I gave to the Wealth Gap Partnership earlier this week, but I think it summarizes really well what the issue is and what I want to talk about. So let me just get this thing going. All right, can folks see my screen? Great. So I want to talk about a couple things. I want to talk a little bit about the bank and what we do, and then I want to dive right into what we call special purpose credit programs, and also look at some data around racial disparities in New England. So just by way of background, for folks who aren't aware of the Federal Home Loan Bank, we are a wholesale bank for all of New England. And what that means is that we provide liquidity to banks and credit unions and insurance companies and community development financial institutions. That is the primary function of the bank. But in addition to that, we support affordable housing and economic growth through a variety of programs, both supporting affordable housing, down payment assistance, and small business lending. So those are the programs that I administer. So I just wanted to kind of give you some of that context. So jumping into the racial disparities in New England. So back in 2022, after George Floyd was murdered, the bank began to think about how we could have an impact in social justice. And obviously, as a bank, thinking about that, I mean, finance and mortgages and things of that like are within our sphere. So we thought, what could we do to have an impact on the racial homeownership gap in New England? And so we entered into a contract with the Joint Center for Housing Studies at Harvard University and commissioned a study to look at the differential access to homeownership for people of color versus their white counterparts. And as you can see on the screen here today, that on average, people of color own their homes at a rate of about 38%, whereas white people own their homes at about 72%. That is a significant gap, and what that gap represents is a wealth gap. Most of the wealth that Americans have are either in their 401ks or in their homes. And if you're denied the ability to own a home, you're actually denied the ability to generate wealth. Folks use their homes to send their kids to college, to retire, to start a small business. So if you don't have that opportunity, you're falling behind with respect to the wealth gap. As you can see, there's various segments of races and ethnicities on the chart here, but you can see that the biggest gaps are really with Blacks and Hispanics, and to a lesser degree, Asians, Native Americans, Pacific Islanders, but it's most significantly in the Black and Hispanic community. The next slide really focuses on the sort of the rates as it relates to Hispanics and rates, comparing New England to the rest of the country. And as you can see, in New England, Blacks own at about a rate of about 36%, as I said, and Hispanics at 31%. But when you compare that to the US, it's worse. Overall in the US, Black people own their homes at a rate of about 42%, and Hispanics at about 47%. So we're doing worse here in New England than other parts of the country. So we really have to think about ways of closing that gap. And then this next slide really represents sort of the gaps. When you look at the overall gap comparing New England to the United States, you can see that the gap is bigger in New England than it is the rest of the United States. So we've got a real issue here in New England. I've devised my way of helping out with the issue, and that's what I want to get into next. So our objective at the bank really was a couple of different elements. We were looking to increase the opportunity for people of color to purchase their first homes through what we call a people-based, race-based special purpose credit program. And a special purpose credit program is a provision of the Equal Credit Opportunity Act that allows a financial institution to target credit assistance to a particular class of persons, provided they can back it up with data and have a plan to do so. And what's really, I would say, really interesting about this particular provision in the ECOA is that it allows that specific targeting without violating the Fair Housing Act. You know, there's lots of fear of if you target money to a particular class of individuals, will you be violating the Fair Housing Act? And the answer is no. And there's a provision in the reg that allows you to do that.
We know that Ken was having some internet issues, but hopefully he will unfreeze in a moment. Come back to us.
Thanks for that. I always think it's
Not
me.
just a little bit-
Oh, there we go. We lost
Yeah.
you for a second, Ken.
Okay, all right. Where do you lose me?
I think just as you came to this, you did the top part of this screen.
Okay. So I was talking about the special purpose credit program and our objective, and that we were really intentional about the debt.
We lost you again. We heard you talk about the question of were you violating the law by setting money aside for special groups?
Yeah. So this special purpose credit program provision of the ECOA is actually regulated by the CFPB. But it allows for targeted assistance to people of color, provided you have a data to back up your claim, but that you also have prudential operating standards to be able to allocate the fund and run it. And so that's what we're galvanized behind. And so I was getting into the fact that, you know, because we're a wholesale bank, you know, all of our other member banks can join in with us and spread these resources throughout New England, and that we didn't want to just limit our definition of people of color to African Americans and Hispanic, but to make it more broader because there were gaps in all the subsegments of racial ethnicity. I'm not going to go through the development process because I really want to get to the product, but it takes long. We started in 2021, 22 in earnest, and we were able to actually launch the program in June of last year, but it's a fairly detailed process. We met with our regulators of the bank and banking regulators and did a lot of outreach to get to this point of being able to launch the program. So in terms of the program design, so as I mentioned, last year we launched it on June 1st. We capitalized the program with $2.5 million as a pilot program. We had 97 unique banks and credit unions from throughout New England participate in the program, which was just a tremendous response to a real serious issue. The program was so successful that we reauthorized the program again for 2024. And I'm happy to say that the application period opened on April 1st, and we had 112 unique banks and credit unions submit applications to participate. So that means real dollars getting into the hands of people in New England. And just in terms of the program's design, to kind of give you a little bit more perspective, excuse me, as I mentioned, we allocated $5 million to the program. Our members can use up to $500,000 per institution. This is the really, I think, very impactful part of the program, is that we can award up to $50,000 to offset down payment, closing costs, and even allow that home buyer to buy down interest rate by 2 points. That's significant in New England because the cost of housing is so high, and every dollar is critical in order to get, you know, that affordability down. In terms of the borrower's requirements, you've got to be a first-time home buyer. You've got to be a person of color as defined in our written plan, and I just went over the categories. We do require that a self-certification of race and ethnicity be executed. The home buyer has to contribute $1,000, and they must have a pre-purchase and post-purchase education, and they've got to get the mortgage loan through one of our financial institutions. All property types are eligible, whether it be a condo, 1 to 4 family unit, it could be a manufactured housing unit, as long as it's in a New England region. We do retain the funding for 5 years. And what that means is in the event of a sale or a refinance within the 5 years, there's a potential for the home buyer to pay back some of the subsidy. And we think that's a fair trade-off for $50,000. And this last slide really just talks about some of the statistics of the first year. So I mentioned we had allocated 2.5 million. Ultimately, 51 households of color were assisted. We had 23 different members. You can see that the average grant amount was about $49,000. The average sales price was about $365. So again, we feel like the first year as a pilot was pretty significant and successful, and so we got it reauthorized for 2024. The next slide just shows some of the demographic correlations. You know, if you look at this slide, approximately 80% of the funding went to African Americans or Hispanics. And you can see the correlated sales prices. But then the balance of the money went to Asians, and then Native Americans or Alaskan natives. So we feel like that was a good mix for the first showing of the program. We hope to have a broader distribution this year with $5 million to give out. And then here just kind of looks at the income levels, and you can see that the predominant sort of income level that received funding were in that 81, I want to say like 60 to like 81 through 100% of AMI categories. Those are the lower categories, but those are certainly the categories that need the funding the most. And so we feel pretty confident about where the median income analysis shows us. So with that, I am going to stop sharing. I'm happy to take any questions. I know I went through that really quickly, but I wanted to kind of get it out and leave time for questions.
Thank you. That is a great program. People have questions, comments?
I have one quick question. Through the data, Ken, is there a way, or do you know, when we look at New England, where the amount, what towns or cities really utilize that fund, those funds or the program?
I do. Yeah, we map everything. We map the sort of the original address of the home buyer and then the new address. And I do have some slides on that. By memory, what I can say is that we definitely had an equal distribution in, I shouldn't say equal. Most of the funds were utilized in the 3 southern New England states, so Connecticut, Mass, Rhode Island. Demographically speaking, there are less people of color in Maine, Vermont, and New Hampshire. So not as many funding in those 3 states. I can tell you that and I can get you the data, Antonia, but there was a good chunk of money, I think, in Middlesex County, as well. So I could definitely get that breakout for you.
Right,
have-
there's oh, sorry.
Yeah,
Becky, go
just a quick question. Do those homes that are purchased that way, do they count on the town's subsidized housing inventory?
They do not. They don't count for the 40B.
And just, is there an easy way for people like me way out in Groton, not in Boston, and how to access that program? Is it through the local bank that is affiliated with you, or?
Yeah, I should have made that clear. So because we're a wholesale bank, everything that we do is through one of our member financial institutions. So that means the banks and the credit unions. So if you're interested in a product like this, there's a list on our website of all the banks that are participating. You would go into one of the banks and say, hey, I just saw a presentation about this program. I know you have it because I see your name on the website. How do I get access to the program?
Linda, did that answer your question? Okay. All right.
Could you
Yeah,
put the
go ahead.
website on the chat for us, please?
Yeah, I'll
That would
throw
be
it in the
helpful.
chat for you guys.
Thank
Yep.
you so much.
Anybody else? Do you have a sense, Kenny, you may not know this, but I assume that price is one contributor to why we are doing so much worse in Massachusetts. Do you have a
Oh.
sense of what the other contributing factors are?
It's a combination. So because we have a variety of programs at the bank, from affordable housing to this program, the small business, I think it's a couple of things. Obviously, high sales prices are hurting affordability everywhere. But when you couple that with high interest rates, it's doubly hurtful and impactful, because typically there's an inverse relationship between sales prices and interest rates. When
Right.
sales prices are high, interest rates are lower, and therefore you can get a more affordable mortgage payment. But when interest rates are high and sales prices are high, it's like a double whammy. I mean, there's really not much you can do about it. You know, I think a couple of years ago, we were at 3.5%, 4%. Now the average rate is about 7%, 7.25%. So that's doubling your mortgage payment on the same sales price. So it makes it difficult for folks who, you know, with lower incomes, to afford the mortgage payment. And even moreover, I mean, the rents are really, really high in our region as well. So the ability for a renter to save for a down payment is also very difficult, right? You can't pay exorbitant rents and also save money for a down payment. They just don't go together. Not at the income levels that we serve.
Right, right.
Could you talk a little bit about the education piece that you do with the prospective homeowners? I'm curious.
Absolutely. Yeah, there are so many studies that say that the key to success of homeownership for people is having homeownership education and counseling. And so for all of our programs, we require that our home buyer get that training through what we call a HUD certified counselor, where they actually sit down and go over, you know, their budget, financial literacy. They learn about the mortgage process. They learn about various mortgage products. You know, it's an attempt, and it's a proactive way of getting folks to not make mistakes that would jeopardize, you know, their ownership of a home.
What kind of, do you have sort of a sense yet of the success of that? Like, how is that, you know, the folks that you help buy a home, have they been successful in retaining that home? Have they been able maybe to, what everybody does, which really is that building wealth, like leverage one house to the next house, that sort of thing?
Yeah, we don't know yet because we
Yep.
just released it last year, but we do we do track foreclosures.
Yep.
In our portfolio. So we have 2 other down payment assistance programs as well. They're not focused on people of color, but the general down payment assistance. Our foreclosure rate in those programs is less than 0.1%.
Wow.
Right? Like they don't foreclose.
Yeah, that's great.
And we would expect sort of the same experience with these home buyers as well, but we'll see.
Great. Anybody else? Questions, comments? All right, thank you. Ken, thank you so much. That was
Oh, I think you
very
had one
interesting.
more. I think Linda
Oh, I'm
raised her
sorry,
hand.
Linda, did you have another question? I'm sorry. I thought you were waving.
No, sorry. I actually was thinking about the MBTA communities bill and wondering if there are any provisions to make sure people know about your programs and how to access them, and both to the communities and the potential homeowners, because there are a lot of sticking points in our little communities about accepting that MBTA communities, and that might help.
Yeah. There's a mismatch here between these programs because the program that I'm implementing here is a demand side response. The MBTA community law in 40B and those others, they're more like supply side, right? Let's get the zoning to a point where it's more inclusive.
Lost you again. Oops. Might be gone.
Oh. Well, thank you.
All
Yeah,
right. if he-
I can follow up with Kenneth to get an answer for you, Linda, because I think he did hear the question, so we'll follow up with him.
All right.
Thank you.
I have
course.
another question.
Oh, yeah, Chris, go ahead.
Should I?
Yeah,
So,
sure, let's. All right,
okay.
maybe he'll click back in the meantime.
All right.
Or should we
So-
put the question in the chat and then if he comes
Oh, yeah,
back?
that's a good idea.
it's right
You
there.
want to do that?
Yeah, I mean, I can do both. I can just talk
Okay.
and then I can put it on. Is it on now? I don't know.
I don't know, I
So it
thought
seems like-
so.
Yeah, it seems like it's a really wonderful program, and I was wondering if there are some other ways that other banks would adopt this kind of program. You know, not just this bank. I mean, the pilot program was very successful, but if there are any other way to make it more kind of widespread, so then
Right.
more banks will participate. I think that'd be really wonderful.
Especially if, as Ken says, the foreclosure rate is so low and that sort of thing. It's not
Yes.
even though the bank has to put that money up on front, it does sound like they're getting their money back. So that's not the issue.
I think that is really encouraging statistics, less than 1%. And I'm saying it because right now it is just such a difficult time to buy house for anybody, right? Especially our younger generation, Gen Z and the millennials. Everything is so expensive. The shortage of the housing, interest rate, the housing expenses, and the insurance rate. Everything is so expensive. So I think particularly this type of program could be one of the really good beneficial programs particularly for the people of color.
Looks like Ken's back. Can you hear us? Ken? Oh, good. Perfect. No, maybe gone again.
Yep, I can hear you.
Oh, good.
I let
So,
Angela, we've had
Did you want to
blackouts.
finish,
So-
did you want to finish the answer to Linda's question about the 40B communities? And then Chris had a question commending the bank for the program and wondering if you had ideas about how to get other banks to jump into this business.
Yeah,
Expand it.
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I was mentioning, Linda, that the MBTA communities law and other zoning reforms are really designed to attack the supply side, meaning build more affordable housing. My program is specifically designed to address the demand side, allowing people to purchase wherever they want to purchase. So sort of two different objectives. But there are some similarities as well in sort of the intent, which is inclusivity, right? Getting people to be able to buy wherever they want and live wherever they want. So in terms of it really is an outreach campaign. I mean, I've been speaking all around the country about this program. I will say that there are 10 other federal home loan banks across the United States, and they're all beginning to adopt these special purpose credit programs. And you're beginning to see a lot of other commercial banks institute their own special purpose credit program. So the word is getting out. They've actually been around for 50 years. There's been a lot of hesitancy amongst financial institutions to use them because they were afraid of violating the fair housing laws. But in 2022, all the banking regulators came out and said, along with HUD, that these things do not violate fair housing. And in fact, you should be using them as a tool to close the racial homeownership gap. So there's a wider spread understanding and hopefully adoption of these going forward.
Thank
you.
you.
All right, Ken, thank you so much. Take care.
Thank
Enjoy
you for the time. I
summer.
appreciate it. I'm going to hang on until 11. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. All right, turning to our second speaker, Sulaina Dubala, who is the founder and CEO of Forever Welcome Foundation and a certified diversity professional. And Sulaina is an advocate for immigration reform and a passionate voice against hate crimes. And she founded the Forever Welcome Foundation, bringing a really unique immigrant perspective to the advocacy work. She had previously worked as a data integration engineer for InTouch Group in Overland Park, Kansas. She was born in India. She moved to the United States to pursue her dreams of education and a career in 2007. Tragically, her life took a very unexpected turn when her husband, and I may mispronounce this a little bit, but Trunavis, was fatally shot in a hate crime in Kansas. I will say I may have not pronounced that name as well as I should have, but Sulaina was kind enough to explain to me earlier. It's a beautiful name, and it actually means the source of light. And since his death, Sulaina has become an outspoken advocate for victims of hate crime, really leveraging her terrible, tragic personal experience to shed light on the challenges faced by immigrants and minority communities. Her foundation is really her effort working tirelessly to foster inclusivity and understanding in diverse communities. She has left Kansas and now lives in Orlando, where she spends a lot of time immersing herself in music and traveling and cooking as well as this work. So, Suneta, I just have such incredible respect for your having taken such a tragedy and turned it into good. So thank you for being here to share the story today.
Thank you, dear Ryan. Thank you for having me, Antonia and Roshan, for kind of reaching out to me and coordinating everything. As dear Ryan has mentioned, I am here in Orlando, the Sunshine State. I mean, we have had rain for the past few days, and today we have some sunshine, so I think we can technically call it the Sunshine State. So good morning, everybody, and thank you for having me and giving me an opportunity to share about my journey, my story, and the birth of Forever Welcome Foundation. Let me quickly share my screen and you're able to see my screen, right?
Yes, perfect.
Okay. So the presentation is about Forever Welcome Foundation and how it began, the journey of it, and then also one of our key initiatives that we have started as part of our foundation, which is a dialogue workshop called Fostering Welcoming Environments Through Inclusive Dialogue, which is a meaningful dialogue about immigration in the UAE. Srinivas, and I fondly call him Srinu, so you might hear me saying his name as Srinu, which was all his family and myself and everybody close to him, and we used to address him as. He comes from a very humble background, and a middle-class family based out of Hyderabad, a southern metropolitan city in India. He was his fascination with engineering and his aspirations to achieve big got him to apply to universities here in the US. And so he immigrated to pursue his master's in the year 2007 to the United States. He graduated with a master's degree in electrical engineering from University of Texas at El Paso. He began his career in aviation as a flight control systems engineer with Rockwell Collins, which is currently Collins Aerospace, Olathe, Kansas in 2014 as a aviation program manager with a focus on building autopilot systems for helicopters. He is fun-loving, kind-hearted, ambitious, family-oriented, a sports lover. I mean, he was everything. I can go on and on about him. And a person who absolutely covers. And then my name is again Sunaina Dumala, and then I also come from the same city, Hyderabad. And then I also come with a family with 3 girls, and I'm the last of the 3, the youngest and the most pampered one of the family. And my aspirations also to become an independent woman and to see the world through my eyes got me here to the US in 2007. I was the first female from my entire extended family to do so, to move to a new country to pursue higher education. It was such a big deal that there were about 30 or 40 people that came to see me off at the airport, which also kind of made me a little embarrassed. I was introduced to Srinu, virtual friend online, while the process of applying for universities in the US. It's time to get attracted to his charm and profess my love to him. After dating for a few years here in the US, we got married in 2012, and we moved to Olathe, Kansas in 2014. We got our first home, and we were slowly realizing our American dream, and everything seemed perfect as everything was coming together finally. But life had something else in store for us. On February 22nd of 2017, on the fateful night, Srinu and his friend Alok, his work buddies, they had this usual habit of going to the local neighborhood bar and grill to hang out after work happy hours. And I still remember that day in 2017, which was so unlikely for a Kansas weather. We had such a pleasant weather in 70s, and they're enjoying the college, the Big 12 basketball game while enjoying their happy hours. Until this man came to them and started using racial slur against them. He questioned about their status in the country and if they were illegal and from where they were from, also including calling them sand niggers. There were some good Samaritans that were in that bar that stepped up, stood by my husband and his friend, involved the bar management, and they walked him out of the bar. They thought the trouble was gone, but this man came back and and he yelled, "Get out of my country," before pulling the trigger and killing my husband. Dr. Ryan, I would like to quickly, dear Ryan, I would like to quickly correct you that you in your introduction, you said that there were 2 people that were killed. I'm so thankfully, my husband's friend is still alive. He has 2 beautiful sons now. It was only my husband that could not survive the shooting. And so Srinu was my sole support system. And when I heard what had happened to him, and my instant or my immediate reaction was that I'm going to leave this country. But then when I got to know that the shooter used the words, "Get out of my country," before killing him, I said, I can't leave. And if I'm leaving, then I'm going to let the shooter win, and I can't let that happen. I had to be here to continue to live our dreams, though it was that I had to do it by myself. And so when life came to that standstill in a brink of a second, and losing my sole support system, it was very painful. But I'm so glad and I'm fortunate that I had so many people around me that helped me transform my pain into passion and becoming a voice for immigrants. I founded the Forever Welcome Foundation in honor of my husband's life, and so that and as a legacy for him, and that he just doesn't remain as a statistic. My aim through the foundation is to build cross-cultural understanding between immigrants and non-immigrants, while also helping the recent immigrants in thriving here when they're starting their journey in a new country. And so the mission of Forever Welcome Foundation is united by our human experiences. Forever Welcome Foundation works to advance the American dream by fostering inclusive and welcoming communities through awareness, advocacy, and action. The name Forever Welcome is the answer to the question that I'd raised. Do we belong here as immigrants following the untimely or tragic death of my husband, Srinu? And so the outpouring of love that I received from communities across at large helped me find the answer that I belong here. And this is very much my home. And I wanted to reflect that same and resonate the same message with other immigrants trying to come to the US. And so and that there are still so much more good things here in America. And my husband had that firm belief that good things happen to good people. And so that's why Forever Welcome exists today. And also Forever Welcome, our emphasis is on the we in the welcome. By that, we are trying to say it's not I, it's not me, but it's us, it's we, and that's what makes us as one when we are all coming together and able to live with that understanding about one another. And so going back when immediately after the incident had happened, the constant thought in me was, how are we going to change? And so I reached out to my then employer, In Touch, which is now Eversana In Touch, with requests to what can be done to remove the misinformation surrounding immigrants. And that's how we had a group of volunteers that came forward, and Forever Welcome started as a Facebook page where we launched it to share immigrant contributions and raise awareness around immigration. They helped manage it for the 2018, and in 2019 I founded the foundation, or established it as formally as a foundation, and we received a 501c3 status in 2022. We organized peace walks for the first year anniversary, which had about like 400 to 500 people that came and walked in remembering Shrino. We also did the peace walk in 2019. And also that was the year when we formed the foundation. But then our timing was so bad that when we were planning to do events in 2020, but then pandemic came. Like everybody else, it kind of also closed us down. But we still managed to do technical drive where we donated laptops to refugee kids. In 2021, we organized an online supply drive using GoFundMe, and we were able to raise about $10,000 that we gave to our local organizations in Kansas City that work with refugee resettlement, so that we could help them in their expenses in trying to settling down these families. We've done few documentary screenings. We again are encouraging that the dialogue, we are bringing more awareness about immigration and the struggles or the complexities around immigration. And this year, our main focus is on our dialogue workshop, which is, like I said, the title of that is Fostering Welcoming Environments Through Inclusive Dialogue. I will share about that more in a few. I've also been part of many documentaries that brought awareness on the story and my journey. And so the most recent one that I've done was a campaign for AAPI Hate for the AAPI Heritage Month. It was titled the Spread AAPI Love campaign. The motto of that was in order to stop AAPI hate, we need to spread AAPI love, which was in so alignment of what Forever Welcome's mission or our vision is to foster understanding and empathy and to foster unity among us. I would like to play the video for you all to watch.
You might not be sharing audio. I don't know if everybody can hear it.
No, I'm not getting any audio at all, just the video. If the presenter looks at the upper left-hand corner of the screen, she should see share audio.
Do you see that there, Sanaya?
Now, we can hear you speak, just not the audio of the film. If you go to the upper left-hand corner of the Zoom screen, it should have an option, share audio.
Second, sorry.
Or maybe you need to turn the
I'm
audio
not
on
seeing
the
that, but then
YouTube.
what I'll do is that I will share that.
On the YouTube screen, it looks like you need to turn the audio on.
The audio is turned on. It's playing for me, and I don't know, and I'm unable to find. And but then I will want to be respectful and mindful of the time. I'll just post the link to the video in the chat for everybody to see. But then this was a wonderful campaign that I did, which emphasizes again about the importance of about spreading love. Another recent documentary that I've done is Healing Hate, and this was produced and done by PBS Kansas City. Healing Hate features mine and a dear friend of mine, Mindy Corporan, both of us in the documentary. Our mutual tragedies brought us together, and the documentary goes through our journeys and how we were able to transform our pain and our tragedies into something more meaningful, and how the community helped us around in kind of helping us stand up. And it's a very beautiful documentary. I'll also share the link here in the chat in a few minutes, and I'll also share it with Antonia so that she can share it with you later. Moving forward with what I just mentioned about our workshop, this workshop is the problem or the challenge that we are trying to address is obviously the growing or the increasing hate crimes against immigrants. Studies and data have indicated that US is still the #1 country with most immigrants immigrating to the United States. But however, the United States of America, it's currently grappling with a steep rise in anti-immigrant hate crimes, as recent years have witnessed a distressful increase in hostility towards individuals migrating into the country. The word immigration is often misrepresented in media outlets, leading to much disinformation around it, including that we are a threat to the job market, the cultural change around it, or the general fear about the community, which is leading to the xenophobia and the growing hatred towards immigrants. Additionally, the onset of various social media outlets or platforms has also facilitated rapid spread of wrong narrative around immigration and immigrants. And so it is so understanding the causes of this distressing rise in hate crime frequency and its impacts is imperative to developing potential solutions in order to foster more inclusive and compassionate communities. And so that's the goal of our workshop, is to humanize immigrants by building the narrative that not every immigrant story is the same. And that we are humans first, and because we chose to come to a new country to have a better quality of life, that makes us immigrants, but otherwise we are human beings and we come from various and diverse backgrounds. We are using the power of storytelling to create a medium or space to have open and interactive dialogue, to embrace each other's differences, and that helps in reducing the stereotypes and the growing or the biases around immigration or immigrants. From a corporate perspective, it would help in advancing team cohesion and engagement. It also for as more or especially organizations that work globally with the global workforce. The workshop is has two components. One, as I said, it involves storytelling through the documentary. The documentary is called Do We Belong, which is again a documentary made on my story. It's a 14-minute short documentary, but a very impactful documentary that goes through my journey, my husband's and my journey, our dreams, the challenges that I had, and the beginning of the onward journey that I started in trying to promote cross-cultural understanding. The next piece is the dialogue piece, where we provide materials like handbooks that include some data and statistics around immigration and some facts around immigration, along with questions. The questions are again grouped in terms of like, what was your immediate reaction after watching the documentary? What was the aha moment that stuck with you with the documentary, and what cultural identity means to you, and what do you do, what belonging means to you, and how do we work towards or come together as a community to foster more inclusive and welcoming environments around that. And so that's what we're trying to achieve through the workshop. It's also structured in a way that you could just get the copy from us and you could conduct it by yourself, or we could also help you in facilitating the workshop. The workshop is also a source of revenue to the foundation, so that we continue to invest more into this research work and how we can encourage the dialogue and the understanding. And I think it is more needed in these days to promote, to bring people into one room and to get them into having a conversation. I think these days, I think it feels like we have forgotten to to talk, to ask questions, to be curious. And so that is what we are trying to bring back through our workshop. And that brings me to the end of the presentation. Thank you again for having me here today to able to share about, again, my journey and the journey of Forever Welcome. Dear Ryan, I appreciate you for the work you're trying to do with the anti-hate, anti-bias task force. And I think it's a great thing to come up with. And I'm so glad to have been here this morning. Thank you.
And thank you for being here and sharing your story and the really amazing work of the foundation. People have questions, excuse me, questions, comments?
Sorry, before I open it for questions, I quickly wanted to share that June is also the Immigrant Heritage Month. So I'm so happy to be here and commemorating with the Immigrant Heritage Month and being here to present about the foundation.
Questions, comments?
I have one quick question. And again, thank you so much for sharing your testimony. It can't be easy every time that you talk about that dark time in your life. So I appreciate you. Can you just reflect a little bit of how this was received back in India? I think a lot of times when we hear the story, we don't hear the impact of another country and how that impact that community. I mean, it was beautiful that 30 people came to when you left, and they were really, hopeful for your journey. So can you just talk a little bit about that perception of the U.S. back in India when this happened, when you came?
There was certainly a huge shock in the community because I think this was the first after the 2016 elections, and the way it turned out, it completely shook everybody's dreams. And also there was I think soon after the incident, right, because the information was still emerging and trying to understand what led to this. And I think the media here was saying, and the media there was catching up bits and pieces and was relaying it there. So it was a combination of that, like the safety of their kids, of like, would my kids be safe? Would my families be safe? Even within my family, all my extended family, they were also heartbroken. My husband's family, my family did not want me to return back because obviously they were like your sole support system, your rock, your husband is not physically not with you, and do you want to risk yourself by going yourself and living there in that same city by yourself? And I was like, yes, I can do that. I had my parents accompany me to help me through my journey for that 1 year. And when they saw the way the community was rallying around me, the amount of support I was getting, it gave them so much of confidence that their daughter did the right thing by coming back and trying to relive the life that was taken away from her.
Thank you. Thank you, and thank you for being with us today. Thank you.
Yes, and I will share in the chat the link to the video and then also our promotional flyer for the workshop. We do want to do, we are trying to reach out to as many communities as possible in the workshop. The flyer will give you some more information into what the workshop is.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, turning to our next speaker, who is Ted Landsmark. And Ted is the Distinguished Professor of Public Policy and Urban Affairs and the Director of the Kitty and Michael Dukakis Center for Urban and Regional Policy in Northeastern. Ted has been a civic planner, a civil rights and equity advocate, a higher education administrator, an arts and cultural researcher, and a community engaged social activist, both here in Boston and across the country. He serves on the leadership committee of Northeastern's Faculty Senate, and as director of the Dukakis Center, Professor Landsmark oversees interdisciplinary research on urban policy matters including housing, gentrification, economic development, civic engagement, school design, comprehensive services, transportation, resilience, and public service. Dr. Landsmark teaches the open classroom on community engagement in policy planning and design, racial equity and civic justice, and he teaches the capstone courses. He has convened an annual conference on equitable policy engagements, and his research and practice interests include diversity and environmental design and education, higher education administration, community-based economic development, historic preservation, resilience, sustainability, and African-American artistry. Professor Landsmark was Mayor Walsh's first appointment to the Boston Planning and Development Agency's Board of Directors, and he brought to that task really a wealth of expertise in architecture, in urban design, civic leadership, architectural and construction law, and community advocacy. Since he has joined the board, the agency has rebranded. They've held hundreds of community meetings every year. They've planned and facilitated the development of over $50 billion in real estate, including 35,000 housing units, 30% of which have been income restricted. And they've generated over $15 million in jobs training, and affordable housing funds. During his 17 years as president and CEO of the Boston Architectural College, Dr. Landsmark has led the growth of that school from a design center into an internationally recognized multidisciplinary higher education institute. And I've never met Dr. Landsmark, but I have certainly read him probably once a week being quoted on one of these issues in some publication. So it is a real honor to have you here, and thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you and good morning. And next time I'll have to send over a much shorter introduction. I want to make a couple of comments which derive largely from my role as an educator. I've been a social activist for a number of years, but largely in the context of what I've been able to do within the context of higher education and the like. And I want to start by referencing two key examples from my professional life and personal life. The first is the aftermath of the photograph that made me famous and somewhat iconic in the greater Boston area, and that was a photograph of a group of young high school students attacking me with an American flag on City Hall Plaza in 1976. That photograph is usually referenced today as a symbol of racism and racial hatred in the greater Boston area during the busing period. But I think what's really important about that moment is not the photograph itself, but what happened afterwards. The event took place just before Easter and Passover in 1976. And what ensued was a kind of coming together of a number of spiritual and cultural communities in the greater Boston area to talk about what the real meaning was of the city's division and the disparities that existed among a number of people in the city at that point in time. And what ensued was a series of dialogues, a series of questions that were raised largely in churches and community centers and youth centers that led to a great many dialogues during that period about the nature and meaning of racism in the city and the impacts that racism was having on economic development, on the city's sense of what it was, on questions of access to schools, to access to employment, and to the way in which the city was being perceived around the world as a place that was not welcoming to people of color. And in those days, what was apparent was that there were a fairly limited number of places where people could come together to have discussions about those kinds of issues and to talk about strategies and tactics that might be employed to overcome some of the racist policies and practices that had been developed over the years. Churches, community groups, and a number of public institutions opened themselves up as places of common ground where people could begin to have discourse and dialogue about what kinds of solutions might be put in place. And in fact, a series of initiatives were put in place. The MBTA, for example, began to open jobs to people of color. We began to see more women and more people of color as bus drivers and as people working within the mechanical areas of the T. Many of our private companies, Filene's and Macy's, for example, began to open up jobs to salespeople. A number of our public agencies, such as the courts, began to open up jobs and employment opportunities to people of color. And a lot of that emerged from a sense that the city needed to overtly confront the racism and the patterns of racism that had existed. And there were forums that were created to bring people together to then enter into dialogue around those kinds of issues. So that what the photograph did was to incentivize a number of greater Boston communities to address some of the issues in a more forthright way than had been the case up to that time. And there was a level of community engagement that followed that began to address issues of racism in the greater Boston area. The second example that I would use was the period of time subsequent to that when I worked as a part of the Ray Flynn administration. and the city came to a point where we had a record number of murders in the city. And it was clear to those of us who were in public positions that simply looking to the police and to our public safety policies and procedures would not begin to address that issue of an excessive number of murders without the involvement of a number of people in communities. And so the mayor convened a meeting of several hundred people at St. John Seminary out by Boston College to bring together a wide range of community stakeholders who then spent several days discussing what the potential solutions might be to addressing those kinds of issues of violence, particularly youth violence and domestic violence. And the seminary served as a forum, a platform, where people could once again come together to talk about how to resolve the issues. And of course, over a 2 or 3 day period of those meetings, several hundred people came up with several hundred solutions. And many of those solutions were put in place. They ran the gamut from expanding healthcare to addressing issues of teen pregnancy, addressing issues of guns on the street and gun buybacks, placing street workers on the streets late at night to work with gang members, looking at the early stages of the opioid crisis. But what was important, I think, in both of those instances was that forums were created where people were able to come together to talk openly and intentionally about what the solutions might be, rather than simply discussing what the disparities and what the issues of racism were in terms of the differences that existed among people. So now we're at a point where the way we communicate with each other is much more divisive than it was at that point in time. Social media and the political environment have created even greater divisions among people than were perceived to exist back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And the question is, where do we come together? Where is the common ground? Where are the forums that one can look to? Our churches, our community organizations, and the like are not perceived to be as effective as bringing people together as they were 20, 25, 30 years ago. And therefore, we have to find places where there is a sense of safety in terms of expressing differences of opinion. And there have to be places where people begin to feel as though they can have conversations about difficult issues in a space where they won't be isolated, and where in fact they might be able to find common ground. And what I would submit is that in the greater Boston area in particular, we have those spaces and we don't use them enough. And those spaces, from my perspective, are our colleges and universities, which are among the most diverse institutions within our region, the most engaged with our communities in a variety of both positive and negative ways across our region. And they're places which are supposed to serve as centers for dialogue and discourse, places where individuals can take a look at hard research and can have hard conversations about how we get along with each other, what our differences might be, what our commonalities might be, and how we can go about using our ability to heal and to counsel one another and to recognize the strengths and respect that we need to have for one another as individuals and as communities. I would submit that many of our colleges and universities in particular are engaged with very positive community activities. They provide tutoring, they provide sports activities, they provide open spaces where individuals can communicate with each other. But I'm not at all convinced yet that our public officials have utilized those colleges and universities and the kinds of open spaces and safe spaces for dialogue that the colleges and universities themselves can be. Both around the aftermath of my attack on City Hall Plaza and during the period of time when we were able to reduce the murder rate in the city by bringing about open dialogue. Colleges and universities played a major role in serving as forums. And in the greater Boston area in particular, we have the highest percentage of higher education institutions of any city that I can think of in the world. And yet we, to a large extent, don't look to them to serve as facilitators, as forums for places where we can begin to have meaningful conversations, not just about the disparities that exist, but also about the strategies that might be developed and put in place to change those kinds of disparities. Colleges and universities right now are deeply involved in discussions of economic development, of opioid use, of anti-racist practices, of gentrification in our neighborhoods, in healthcare disparities and the like. And yet, to a large extent, those of us who have been involved with the public sector have not looked to colleges and universities as places where we can engage in dialogue that leads to the implementation of real solutions for questions of things like the extent to which our students are in fact the gentrifiers, the extent to which our healthcare facilities are in fact useful in terms of having addressed COVID, the extent to which our campuses can provide workforce development opportunities for people who live in adjacent and further out communities, around the ways in which we deploy our transportation systems to address issues of congestion and sustainability and resilience. And so I would submit that we're at a point where we need to think differently about the way we approach our colleges and universities to ask them to become active participants and stakeholders in engaging in dialogue that involves the kinds of issues of social justice that students in particular want to discuss and want to think about how they engage with, but that we don't in a formal, intentional, and systematic way engage those students. What I found as a professor at Northeastern is that our students are doing everything from providing health services and legal services and economic development services to communities. They're running sports teams, they're managing tutoring, they are involved with environmental issues, horticultural issues, in ways that serve communities, and yet to a large extent, those activities remain entrepreneurial and unfocused and not necessarily part of a citywide effort to really utilize the hundreds of thousands of students and faculty who care about the city and who care about issues of social justice and who care in ways wherein they can be mobilized to become facilitators of dialogue and the implementation of solutions that begin to address those kinds of issues. So what I would submit is that particularly for those who are involved in this morning's dialogue that we need to begin to very intentionally rethink the role of our colleges and universities in the greater Boston area as stakeholders. Those institutions are not going away. They don't simply open their offices and run for a few years and then disappear. And I think we're at a point where our public leadership can begin to sit down with the leadership in our colleges and universities to begin to address some of the issues of race and social class and gentrification and transportation planning and policy in ways that really use the role of discourse and dialogue and research within colleges and universities to begin to address some of the kinds of problems that this group in particular are interested in solving. I'll conclude by saying that at the Dukakis Center, we have provided free consulting services to a number of communities in the greater Boston area that have run the gamut from small-scale economic development in places like Attleboro to economic development and housing in places like Taunton, to work with some of our healthcare agencies around opioid addiction, to issues around public safety in Lynn and other communities. And we look forward to working with the kinds of groups that are represented in this morning's call to provide free advice and service around the kinds of issues that we're interested in dealing with around social justice today.
You're muted, dear Ryan.
Sorry. Thank you, Professor. Questions, comments? Scott?
Thank you, DA Ryan, and thank you, Dr. Landsmark, for your leadership and all your service over the years. Your inspiration over the years when I went to Northeastern, and again, thank you for your service.
So, Dr. Landsmark, so as you just suggested, so should municipalities or those of us that are doing the work in the community, is it specifically reaching out to a particular department within a university or like the Dukakis Center that we would look for that, depending on the school and what our topic is? I just want to give some kind of a like call to action of how we would access.
I think all of our universities have community service entities that connect students to community service opportunities. At Northeastern, for example, we do have a formal community services organization that is involved with everything from engaging students in supporting voting efforts, to working as tutors and coaches, to developing support systems around legal services and healthcare outreach. And every one of the universities has a community services group that is in a position to connect students to community organizations. The primary limitation is that we work on an academic calendar. And so work tends to be done on a fall semester or summer semester or spring semester basis. And the kinds of support that you might get may not be very long term as such, but from semester to semester, the students are very anxious to become engaged with community activities. And those community service offices and often the spiritual offices and the affinity groups are the ways that students can be put to work in communities in serviceable ways.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Yes, Linda.
Sorry, it's me again. Our town is grappling with working to be more welcoming, and one of the two of the instructional motions at our last town meeting were to deal with the violent sword and elbow holding the sword in our seal that copies the state seal, and also to include education along with a land acknowledgement. Are those things that your students might be interested in getting involved in, or is that too narrow a scope? It's
No.
really embedded in the social justice perspective.
No, I don't think that that's too narrow a scope. We've worked with communities on the arts, on imaging, on how to engage communities around symbols of hate. We have certainly engaged with cultural activities. We've done a lot of work, for example, with the Emerald Necklace Conservancy and with the trustees to develop cultural programming involving community groups. Our art schools in particular are interested in overcoming the stereotypic imaging that has existed in a number of communities and replacing that with more positive images for our communities, whether it's looking at how neighborhoods are named, changing the name of Dudley Square to Nubian Square, for example, or working on graphic imaging. And many of the art students very much want to use their skills both in traditional media and newer digital media, using artificial intelligence to begin to develop new symbols and new ways of presenting communities as being more welcoming.
Thank you so much. It's exactly what my question was. Thank you. And how would we get in touch with these students? Would that be through the Dukakis Center or through, are you talking about Northeastern?
I think that you can reach out either through me and through the Dukakis Center, or you can contact our Dean of the Arts directly, indicating an interest in having a kind of support for what it is you're trying to get done around imaging and overcoming stereotypes.
Thank you. And the Dean of the Arts is Northeastern's Dean, or is that
Yes.
within Dukakis? Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you
Within-
very much.
Within Northeastern.
All right. Catherine.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Liz. You're just amazing. I don't know when you sleep after hearing your
Very much an overachiever.
It's unbelievable. I'm wondering if you work on the state level, if you have any contact with working with the state legislature in any way, and if so, what the impact of your work has been.
We have both individual students who have worked with individual legislators, and then teams of our students who've worked with legislative committees and with the legislature on individual projects, running the gamut from public safety issues to certainly housing issues. We've worked with mass development. We've worked with the MBTA. We have worked with a number of health agencies on questions of homelessness and opioid addiction. And again, we can be reached through the Dukakis Center, and we have found both individual students and teams of students who are very data-driven, who are thrilled for the opportunity to work in the public sector.
Thank you. Well, thank you all. Thank you to our speakers. Thank you for joining us today. As I hope, especially for new members, you see the level of content that we bring to these meetings and just an opportunity to make those connections. We have posted as well as other people adding lots of events in the chat from various communities. So please take advantage of that. And I look forward to seeing you all next month. Thank you. Take care. Thanks, Antonia. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.